You know how sometimes like you're in a room with people and everyone's got totally different opinions on something, and then somehow, everyone ends up agreeing.
Yeah.
Or like the total opposite happens and things just kind of explode.
Yeah, yeah.
We're diving into some research about the hidden forces, I guess you could say, that make those opinion shifts happen. And let me tell you, the findings are way more interesting than like your average Twitter debate.
Yeah, it's really fascinating how this research goes, like, beyond just the surface level, right?
Yes.
Like, we're not just talking about arguments and who wins a debate. It's like we're talking about group size, how those connections we make with each other, how open we are to new ideas. It's really wild. Like, all these things can totally change how opinions evolve.
Okay, so before we get to the really mind-blowing stuff, let's lay some groundwork.
Yeah, sounds good.
So this research uses a model, which is surprisingly elegant, I gotta say, to represent how opinions actually change.
Okay.
Imagine each person's opinion as like a point on a line. So say a line between 0 and 1.
Gotcha. So it's not like a scorecard or something where like 1 means you totally agree and 0 means you're like absolutely not.
Okay.
It's more about like where you stand compared to everyone else.
Right, exactly. It's all relative to the other people in the group, right?
Exactly.
So, okay, let's say you have your opinion point on this line and I've got mine. And we're, talking, sharing our thoughts. If our opinions are close enough on that line, they might actually start to move closer together. Kind of like magnets, almost.
Oh, I like that. And that's where this idea of affinity comes in, right?
Yeah, so tell me more about that.
Okay, so affinity is basically, it's how much we trust and relate to each other.
Okay.
And turns out it plays a huge role in like who influences who in a group.
So it's not just about whether I can like build a super convincing argument.
Right.
It's also about if you even care what I think, right?
Exactly.
It's kind of like how you're way more likely to listen to, a close friend than some rando, in the YouTube comments section.
100%.
Or X or whatever it is this week.
Right. And that's what makes this research so cool, because a lot of these other opinion models, they don't even include affinity.
Interesting.
They miss that completely. And it's like, come on, that's real life.
Right.
So by adding it in, this model gets us way closer to understanding like why some arguments just fall flat, even if they sound good on paper. You know what I mean?
Totally. It's like that saying, people don't care what you know until they know that you care.
Yeah. Or maybe it's more like, people may not change their minds until they trust where your opinion is coming from.
Yeah, there you go. I like that.
Something like that.
That's good.
But the point is, that trust, that affinity, it's really important. And it's going to get even more interesting when we start talking about small versus large groups.
So we've been talking about this whole affinity thing, right? Like how much we trust each other's opinions.
Right, right.
But here's where it gets really wild. The research found this huge difference between how opinions play out in small groups versus, those massive crowds.
Yeah, it's almost like the whole thing flips.
Really?
Yeah. Like in those small, tight-knit groups, like maybe 20 people or less, we're talking affinity, it kind of like comes together faster than opinions themselves.
Interesting. So it's like you get to a point where it's like, hey, I really see where you're coming from, even if we don't totally agree yet.
Exactly. You get that shared understanding, that trust.
Yeah.
And it's funny because the research actually connects this back to how small work groups, like in the real world, actually function.
That's interesting.
Yeah. Think about like a team project you've been on, right? Like,
yeah.
Didn't you usually figure out like who you could count on, who had which strengths? All that stuff usually comes before everyone magically agrees on the perfect solution.
That's so true. You need that like baseline of trust or else every idea is met with like suspicion.
Right. Exactly. And that's a key takeaway here. In these smaller groups, it's like building that mutual respect, that understanding,
right? That's
what lets you actually get to a place of shared opinion.
That makes sense. So small groups, it's all about building that foundation of trust first.
Totally.
But then like what happens when we're talking about massive groups, like hundreds of people?
Well, things change a bit.
Yeah.
In big groups, like opinions, they actually tend to converge before you even have time to build up that strong affinity.
Oh, wow. So it's like if you're at a concert.
Right.
You're kind of caught up in the energy of the entire crowd.
Right.
More so than like focusing on one person's experience,
Yeah. I like that. That's a good way to put it. in a huge group, you don't have the space for those like deep one-on-one conversations. Right? That's how you actually build those strong connections.
Yeah.
So it's less about that individual trust building. It's more about like how are people reacting to the general vibe of the group as a whole, you know?
Oh, that's interesting.
You might totally shift your thinking based on what you're picking up from everyone else, even if you don't actually know most of those people.
Which kind of makes me think about like those massive online communities.
Yeah, for sure.
Or even like social movements, right? Where you might find yourself agreeing with something just based on like the overall feeling you get from the group.
Yeah, the vibe.
Not because you have like dozens of close personal connections with everyone there.
Exactly. And that actually brings us to another really cool part of this research because, I mean, let's be real. Most groups in the real world, they aren't just frozen in time, right?
Right. Things change.
People come and go, and that actually changes everything.
Yeah. It's like we've been talking about these groups, and it's like they're, frozen in time.
Right. Like a snapshot.
Yeah, exactly. But like in real life, groups are always changing.
Right. Always. People come and go, new ideas pop up. It's dynamic.
Yeah, exactly. It's like that feeling when, I don't know, have you ever been part of a team and things are like really clicking?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And then someone new joins or someone leaves, and it's like the whole vibe kind of shifts.
100%. And that's actually what these researchers wanted to look at, that whole like coming and going thing. They even have a name for it. They call it death birth.
Okay, death birth. I like it. So like, how does that work in this whole model thing?
So imagine like you've got your group, right? And then some people they randomly leave. That's the death part. Then new people come in, each with their own opinions, and that's the birth.
So it's like constantly shaking things up.
Exactly. And what they found is even a little bit of that death birth, just a bit of churn, it can really change those nice, neat opinion clusters we talked about. Like, remember how we were saying everyone kind of ends up on the same page sometimes? Well, once you have people coming and going, it's harder to keep everyone in the same spot. Opinions get a little more, I don't know, spread out.
It makes total sense. It's like if you're trying to keep your lawn perfectly manicured.
Oh,
right?
Yeah.
Like, it's one thing if it's just you taking care of it every day.
Right.
But then, like, the seasons change, the weather's doing its thing.
Yeah.
It's a lot harder to maintain,
Totally. And it gets even more intense when that death birth rate goes up. Think about those companies with crazy high turnover, or like online forums where people are constantly jumping in and out of the conversation. It's almost impossible to maintain like a super unified viewpoint. Way too much change happening.
It's like trying to build a sandcastle right at the edge of the water. Like, good luck with that.
Yeah, exactly. And speaking of shaking things up, we can't talk about all this opinion stuff without mentioning, propaganda.
Oh, right. The elephant in the room.
Yeah, exactly. Luckily, there's this other paper that gets into all that. Like, how do those external messages, those attempts to influence us, how do those play into everything?
Okay, yeah, tell me more about that. I mean, does it actually work? Like, are all those ads and campaigns actually changing our minds?
Well, that's the thing, right? It's not that simple. But the research found something kind of surprising. Those, like, super in-your-face campaigns, the ones that are just, like, constant.
Yeah.
Those actually often backfire.
Wait, really? So you're saying all those ads, all that noise, it might actually be doing the opposite of what they want?
It can. It's like when someone's just hitting you with the same message over and over, you kind of just tune it out. Or worse, you start to get suspicious,
Yeah, totally. Like if you tell me something enough times, eventually I'm just going to stop believing you.
Exactly. And this research, it suggests that's exactly what's happening, at least with opinions.
Okay, so what works better then? If it's not the constant barrage?
Well, it seems like subtlety is key, like timing your message right, framing it in a way that feels more like, I don't know, a conversation, less like a sales pitch.
So more about like working with people's existing opinions, not just trying to like bulldoze over them.
Yeah, exactly. Like, think about it. Are you more likely to try a new restaurant because you saw a billboard or because, I don't know, a friend recommended it?
Oh, a friend, for sure. Mm-hmm. Recommendations from people you trust, those are way more powerful.
Exactly. That personal touch, it makes all the difference.
So after this whole deep dive into opinions, like what's the big takeaway for everyone listening?
I'd say the biggest thing to remember is that there are all these invisible forces at play shaping how we think. Like whether it's the size of the group, those personal connections, even just how someone tries to convince us of something.
Right.
It all matters way more than we realize.
It kind of makes you think about like how we handle disagreements, right?
Yeah.
especially now when everyone's so connected online, and it's so easy to end up in these huge debates.
Totally. Understanding these dynamics, it's like it can help you navigate all that with a little more, I don't know, empathy maybe?
Yeah, and understanding it's like just because someone disagrees with you, it doesn't mean they're like a bad person.
Exactly.
There's probably a whole lot more going on beneath the surface.
Totally. And maybe, just maybe, if we all thought about this stuff a little more, we could actually like bridge some of those divides, find some common ground, you know?
That's a great point to end on. Sometimes the most persuasive voices, they aren't the loudest ones. They're the ones who actually like take the time to connect, to build trust.
100%.
And on that note, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive. See you next time.